absolutely massive, one of the chunkiest and largest set of nerfs we have seen in a while to a single boss. What we're talking about today is the gigantic set of nerfs being thrown at Tindral, mythic Tindral only, coming next reset. So before we talk about a few other things beside the actual nerfs, let's look at the proper changes to the boss in mythic. The first change is that they have removed a cast of Firebeam in phase 1 of Mythic. This basically tries to remove the more annoying, the more difficult to overlap by the end of phase 1, which seems like a good change, but actually will become kind of irrelevant once you read all of the other nerfs coming the way of Tindral, which will be even bigger. The second change is Flaming Germination's damage reduced by 25%. This is significantly reducing the constant AoE damage of P2 and P3 because this is the seed. The passive unavoidable AoE damage going out in phase 2 and phase 3 whenever the seeds are coming out. Bigger change though, especially for your compositions, is that the number of flare bombs has been reduced to 3 instead of 4. And Empowering Flames damage also has been increased to compensate for that by 35%, because of course the flare bombs are the bombs up in the air that are falling down. Those are the ones you want your players to mount up and pick up and then dive bomb with the flare bomb they picked up on the roots or the trends that spawned, so you can kill them very quickly. Since you have one fewer of these bombs, the damage is being increased to compensate for that. The reason why this is a very good change for compositions is because, of course, this was the reason the majority of the raid groups wanted to run this with at least 8 melee DPS. That's because you had to rotate 2 groups of 4 to pick up these 4 flare bombs, and of course you wanted to assign this mechanic to melee DPS only. Why? Because the ranged DPS could also be assigned with the Dispel mechanic. So if you didn't have enough melee DPS and you needed to bring a ranged DPS as part of this rotation of players who have to go up in the air to pick up these bombs, those players might have also gotten tagged by the Dispel, the Fiery Growth Dispel, which would make it very hard for you to actually go up in the air while having this Dispel active. That is also why, for example, specs like Balanced Druid started disappearing from the last couple of bosses of this raid in favor of a Feral Druid, for example. This is gonna make it much less relevant. Now you can scale down back to 6 melee DPS because you will only need 3 players each time. So that is very good, mostly just for your composition, for the freedom of your composition. The other nerf, this is the biggest one in terms of one-shot mechanics prevention. Germinating Aura now prevents players from destroying a seed, but no longer spawns a flaming tree. The TLDR of this is the heinous mechanic during the seeds, where players could only soak 1 seed, and if they soak the second one, they would kill the entire raid. So this is where Blizzard says, okay, let's scale back down on the one-shots. Now, if you soak 1 seed, you simply get, prevented from soaking anymore, but you're not gonna be, wiping the entire raid for that. Seeds are also made even easier with the next nerf, which is that now the number of seeds spawned are reduced by 4. So we're going from 16 down to 12. So now you only have to soak, you only have to cover for 12 seeds, so almost half the raid only, plus you don't have the risk of just one-shotting people if you mess up, soaking multiple ones. Those are the nerfs coming the way of Tindral. It's gonna make phase 1 much more manageable, as well as the overall damage of P2 and P3 cut down by a good 6 to 7% in terms of overall damage, as well as less one-shots due to the seeds no longer wiping the entire raid if you made a mistake on that mechanic. Now, on the broader side of things for this nerf to Tindral, this is interesting because in the recent days, more and more players have been pointing out the seemingly unfair situation around this raid in the last couple of bosses, even adding Smolderon, about the amount of one-shots, the amount of mean mechanics that force the entire raid, essentially, to just die. This was particularly highlighted when you go back to the beginning of Dragonflight And our lead game designer, Ion, as he calls us, had an interview where he said, talking about the design philosophy of the raid encounters, he said, for example, when is it okay to wipe the raid instantly for a mistake? Honestly, the answer should be almost never, at least when it's more like a single person's Twitch reaction mistake of, you fail this if you don't do this mechanic properly. We are okay, we think it's reasonable to kill a single player for doing something like that. You mispositioned, you put yourself in the wrong position, or you didn't use a defensive, etc., you die. That's cool. But to say the entire raid is over because just one guy was 1 yard out of position, that is not our aim. Because yes, we would be making a difficult boss, it will get that into a 3-digit wipe count and we'll get the boss on the list of hardest raid bosses, but that's not actually our goal as encounter designers. That's a fun statement, because even though through Vault of the Incarnates and somehow Aberrus, most of the bosses followed this philosophy of not having too many one-shots because of a single player, like for example when Razaget pushes you out of the platform, it's not that if you fall out of the platform you blow up the entire raid. If you fall out of the platform, you die. When Razaget does the breath cycles around the room and you get hit by the breath of Razaget and die, it's not that you blow up the entire raid. Even to a degree, the positive and negative feature in the intermission of Razaget didn't really wipe the entire raid. Sometimes you only had one or a couple of players die, it wasn't even a full raid wipe anyways. But then you go into Amirdrassil, you go into this raid, and you have the Seeking Infernos, the mythic mechanic of Smolderon, where if you do soak them back to back when you still have the debuff on, that's a raid wipe. Then you have Tindral. If you double soak the Seeds of Flame when you still soak the first one, that's a full raid wipe. If you let the green mushroom explode, that's a raid wipe. If you miss the flare bombs up in the air and they fall down on the ground, that's a raid wipe. And if a healer dispels Fiery Growth when you still have the debuff of the previously dispelled Fiery Growth, or one of the players with Fiery Growth dies with the debuff still on them while the debuff of previously dispelling the other Fire Growth is still on, that's another raid wipe. That's 4 different instances of raid wipes in a single boss. And Ferak has the same. If you miss the orbs in the intermission of Ferak, that's a raid wipe. If Blaze hits one of the healer adds you're trying to heal to go through the portal, that's a raid wipe. If you don't break the Shadow Cage perma stun, that's also a raid wipe. And then the seeds or the corrupted seeds exploding in the last phase, that's also a raid wipe. So we went to 4 different full raid wipe mechanics for one player's mistake in both Tindral and Ferak. And this type of difficulty was visible, not just in terms of one-shots, in terms of wipe counts of these bosses, but also when you compare them to previous tiers or previous expansion bosses. In the first couple of months of the raid, for example, of Amirdrassil, you have almost 50% of the guilds defeating Lardar and Nimue able to defeat Smolderon. But then you only have 22% of those guilds who defeated Smolderon able to defeat Tindral. And then you go all the way up to 46% of guilds who killed Tindral who have defeated Ferak. This shows you that Tindral is even harder than Ferak, this shows you that guilds are getting even more bottlenecked by the second to last boss rather than the actual last boss of the raid. These numbers were much more smooth and consistent in previous raid tiers. Even in Aberrus, 70% of the guilds who killed Zaskarn were able to kill Magmorax, and then 65% of the guilds who killed Magmorax killed Neltarion, and then 43% of the guilds who killed Neltarion killed Sarkaret. See, the number goes down slowly and evenly as the bosses get harder and you get close to the last boss. Even the very hard Sepulchre in Shadowlands, in the first 2 months of the progression, you had 87% of the guilds who killed Anduin, killing Lords of Dread, 79% of the guilds who killed Lords of Dread, killing Rygalon, and 48% of the guilds who killed Rygalon, killing Jailer. you see the very smooth progression of the last 3 bosses. It is obviously good that it gets nerfed. Some players might be debating whether or not waiting for 2 months before the nerf of this boss was too late in some cases, but I think it's a decent wait, especially by looking at the kills. We are now getting into the 200, basically the last run of Hall of Fame. Now you have enough guilds progressing on Ferak to close out the Hall of Fame if they all defeated it right now, right today. So giving advantages to guilds who haven't defeated Tindral yet isn't that big of a deal. Those guilds will still be behind all the others who have already gotten past Tindral and already working on Ferak right now. This was today's point and today's explanation on what's about to come in a few days when it comes to the nerfs to Mythic Tindral. Will be interesting to see if any further nerfs will come to Ferak, or if Blizzard just wants to stand and wait until the Hall of Fame closes before Ferak gets to be defeated. But for now, these are the changes coming in 10.2.5 when it comes to the raid at the very least. So I'm going to leave you all to the rest of your, what's today? Friday? Yes, for the rest of your Friday. And we're starting our goodbyes as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can also be given, of course, completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, what's happening to my throat? I have this thing at the back of my throat that's stinging me. Annoying.